All right, guys, there's a saying, it's kind of cliched, but it's may you live in interesting times. And I would say right now in the NFL, that's pretty fitting. I mean, we could start this off in a number of ways, but the question we've talked about before is, what is this league going to look like in the future? We can say 10 years. I'd like each of you to give me one thing you think about when it becomes the future of football.
So when you think about what you said earlier about the game, right away I was thinking about Jack Tatum. And I remember seeing Jack Tatum hit Darryl Stingley. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the game at that moment and what people were saying about the game. And I was thinking about the consequences of both of them and what they went through. I think one of the challenges is that when you think back to that moment, there were a lot of folks that said that, man, what an incredible hit. And yet we saw a person's life change dramatically. And I think we're going to continue to see that. It's going to be a part of our society in every sport. I think what's fascinating to me is that every sport, we find ourselves in situations where we can't believe that athlete went through what he went through. And in professional football, I think you're going to see and continue to see moments where we can't believe that happened. And yet I think we're trying to find ways to enhance the sport. We're trying to find ways to make sure that we're protecting the individuals, and at the same time, I think the game is going to get better. It's going to be just as exciting, and I think we're going to find ourselves cheering like we have for many years.
John, two things. One about the stadium experience. A couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, I was getting a tour of the new Dallas Cowboys Stadium in Arlington from Jerry Jones. And one of the things I asked him during the course of the tour was, I said, Jerry, I've got a good friend of mine in Montclair, New Jersey, who has 6 season tickets to the New York Giants, and he doesn't go anymore. He doesn't like the in-stadium experience, but more importantly, he has in his house the state-of-the-art system to watch every game. He's got a refrigerator right over here full of beer that he loves. He's got the replay. He's got everything. And so he has not been to a game in years. And in fact, I just checked with him this summer. He has not been to a game since I even talked to Jerry Jones. He sells all his tickets to the games, at the Giants games. So I said, what are you going to do? And Jerry Jones pointed up to the 180-foot wide television, the high-def television inside his stadium. And he said, here it is right here. That is what we did to make sure that when we're 4-9 on December 1st one year, and we have to make sure that people still come to our game, I have the in-stadium experience that's going to kill every other team in the league. So I think it's really, really important. When I talk to owners now in the NFL, the one thing they're all talking about is we have to make the in-stadium experience so good. I got a tour of the Levi's Stadium from Jed York, and so many little things in that stadium. 26 points of sale for vegans only in Levi's Stadium. It's unbelievable.
It's California, man.
And the one other thing, this summer, when I was on my training camp tour of NFL stadiums, I went to Jacksonville and I saw these pools. And I just said to myself, now this beats all, doesn't it? I mean, these pools, and now every week you see the highlights of the Jaguars games. There's no highlights of Jaguars games, except you see people swimming in the pools in the end zone. And so that is what, to me, the future thing is. You have to drag people out of their homes to make sure they're still going to go. And finally, the one thing I would say about the future of football itself and why it's so important for the NFL to take the lead role, not just in domestic violence, personal conduct, but I'm talking about in head trauma. That right now you've got the University of North Carolina, and there may be other schools, but every time a football player goes out to practice, there are sensors in the helmet that senses how often these players get hit during practice and with what intensity do they get hit. And certainly the same thing is happening on Saturday during games. And I think the only way that the mothers and fathers of America are going to continue to allow their children to play football, to sign up for Pop Warner, for Pee Wee, for middle school, for high school, is if they can be 90% sure that their kids are going to be safe playing this game. And right now, I know from talking to people around the NFL that even more than personal conduct, the driving force is making sure that the game's safe enough.
Ronnie, that's something I wanted to talk about with you. You played, you're known as one of the best hitters in NFL history. Right. I mean, you live this. You know exactly what we're talking about, more so than anyone. Would you wanted more information back then? Is that the main thing? I mean, you're going to play the way you're going to play, but just the information that the NFL maybe didn't know or withheld?
Well, if you go back and if you think about the game and at that time, you think about your life at that time, I think one of the fascinating things to me is that I was just talking to a lady last night. Her dad played in the National Football League, and she was sharing with me that he has dementia. He's 83 years old, and he gets together with Tommy Nobis and a number of other folks, and they get together and they go over and they see their physician. Yeah, we would like to know that at some point I might be like Tommy Nobis or I might be like Frank Bruni. Those situations could happen. And yet you got to believe that where we're at today, and it's interesting because I was listening to Ted, and as Ted was talking about the wearables, and as Peter just pointed out, talking about being able to understand information and seeing that you can measure that. I think we're moving in that direction where you can get information. I think at the time when I was playing, and you think about the helmet, I remember seeing Walter Payton, and I said, man, can I look at your helmet? And I looked inside the helmet. It was a suspension helmet. It was
padding?
No padding, 4 straps. I said,
wow.
Is that your helmet? He goes, yeah, that's my helmet. And I really love this helmet. He goes, I'm not going to get rid of that helmet. But you look at the helmet today, and you look at Rydell's helmet, and you look at where it's come from, those helmets have changed. So yes, I would like to have more information at the time. I don't think that information was presentable at the time. I think more information is going to be better for us. It is presentable at this time. I know that the NFL now is tracking more injuries. They're trying to do more things to let people know about the consequences of the game. But more importantly, I think what we have to look at right now, especially with athletes, you got to understand that no matter what sport, there are going to be consequences. And how do you take care of yourself? How do you live after the game? I mean, one of the things that I thought was very interesting as I was talking to Teddy, we started talking about some of the older guys. And as we start talking about some of the older guys, do they understand how to transition into another life? Do they find themselves preparing for another life? And I think one of the challenges for all of us, if you're a sports fan, you want to make sure that that guy that's your hero finds a way to be productive and be a part of society. And so I think it's all of us, I think all owners would tell you that it's their responsibility to be associated with trying to make sure that these guys are being able to transition to have a better life.
You know, 5 years ago when Kurt Warner retired, I'll never forget, he was talking about his last year in football, and he got a concussion from a pretty light hit. And the next week, he had to decide whether he was going to play or not. The doctors sort of left it up to him because he was right on the edge. And he said, you know, there's just too much of the unknown right now, and I'm not going to play. And that's one of the things that led him into retirement after that year for a very simple reason, because he didn't know. Nobody could tell him at age 55, how are you going to feel? And if you get one more concussion, when you get to be 55, are you going to have dementia? Are you going to have early signs of Alzheimer's? Might you get ALS? Nobody could answer it. So he said a very intelligent thing. Made enough money, had enough thrills. I have 7 children. I better be around for them. And he left the game. He left the game before he knew he could still play. And he left the game before that because he just didn't know the answer of what was going to happen when he was 55 years old.
Peter, you know, from the media's sake, and some of this, a lot of it's TV, but, you know, a lot of it's what we write. We talk about guys as gladiators, and that kind of angle to sports. How much is the media, I don't want to say responsible for this, but how much do we propagate the idea that these guys have to play? If you don't play, I mean, you and I were in the press box in 2011 with the Bears when Jay Cutler came out and people didn't know. You have players on Twitter calling him a wimp. They didn't know that his knee was buckling when he tried to stand in the huddle.
Yeah, that was a tough situation because I remember watching that, and at the time the safety committee got together right after that, and we were so upset at the situation because the media had sensationalized that situation, and yet no one knew exactly what was happening. And so John Madden said, look, I'm the chairman of this organization. When we have guys like that are sitting there, we got to make sure that they're not on the sideline. It is a badge of courage to want to stay there on the sideline, to support your guys. But in this case, he needed to get off the sideline. So now they're implementing rules that will allow that player to leave the sideline and to be taken care of.
I think one of the things in our business over the years is that we have made heroes of guys who play. You know, Ronnie Lott, lost part of a finger during a game just so he'd be able to keep playing, and we've made heroes of Ronnie Lott. And again, I'm not passing judgment on either the media the way it used to be or players the way they used to be, but I think one of the things that I've learned, this is my 30th year covering the NFL, one of the things I've learned is that I do not question anybody's injury. I do not question anybody's courage in the course of a game. Now, I might think about it, but I don't openly question it, just because I think it's way too dangerous. Because later on, that day, that week, that month, later on in life, we could find out something very, very serious had happened to this guy, and here we are trivializing it and saying that, oh, he should get back in there. I think that's one thing, and I think the other thing is, I'm really uncomfortable now in writing about what a hero a guy was, because he played with a broken whatever, this, that, or the other thing, Jack Youngblood, Ronnie Lott. It's just, I'm uncomfortable with it, because what you're doing is, when you're writing that, when you're talking about that, what you're doing is you're setting up future people who are listening to this. Boy, I want to be like Ronnie Lott. And you know what? If I'm ever in this situation, I'm going to cut off the tip of my finger so I can keep playing. I don't want to be part of that.
You don't want to be Ronnie Lott.
No, I don't want to be Ronnie Lott. But I admire Ronnie Lott.
And the other thing I would say is that, one of the great things for me is that I'm always humble. I've traveled around the world, because what's fascinating is that when you just mentioned that, how you are typecast. And what's fascinating to me is that, see, I grew up being a military brat. And when I saw Pat Tillman do what he did, so how do we write about that? And what do we say about that? And when you think of courage, is it a better example of courage? So to me, and I always find this amazing, is that no one knows the character of what you go through in your life to be who you are. And what I find fascinating is that in our society, we find ourselves leaving the moral compass of who we are. And that's where sports is today. We have lost our moral compass when it comes to the issues of some of the things that we know that is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. And the hard part is, it's all generated because of the fact that we're so excited about it. The fact that there's so much on the line for whatever we do with that particular sport. But the moral compass needs to come back, and we need to reorganize that with all sports, so we can set an example for our kids. And if we could get that done, and I'm encouraging Ted and all the various owners that are out there of all the sports to come together and say, you know what, sports has went from a place where you had a lot of fun to now, this is a big business. We're talking about, it's bigger than Fortune 500 companies.
You know what's amazing to me about football as a business now? I found myself asking the question in the wake of the Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, Greg Hardy, Ray McDonald stuff, where the NFL, do you know that the NFL right now is going to have a line item in every team's budget? The league can dictate certain things to all teams. Okay? And they're going to have a line item in all teams' budgets now that is not going to be subject to the salary cap, but every year teams are going to have to give in to what they're going to informally call a social responsibility fund. And the league is going to do things like they're going to give $1 million or $2 or $3 million every year to, for example, domestic violence hotlines. And this is not just domestic violence hotlines to serve NFL teams, NFL players. This is domestic violence hotlines so that somebody from Topeka, Kansas, if some woman is getting beaten up by her husband, can hopefully go into the basement or something and lock the door and call this domestic violence hotline and say, what do I do? Having nothing to do with football. And I said, boy, how did we get here? And a very high up guy in the NFL told me, he said, you know, this has changed so much, what's happening in our country, that the reason that people are so angry at Roger Goodell is that people around the United States are looking to football players and football teams in the NFL to be a moral compass. And the NFL said, okay, if that's what our deal is, then we're going to respond to that. In September, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, after the Ray Rice thing broke, the lead story on NBC News every night, Brian Williams, is Ray Rice and domestic violence. And I'm saying to myself, what is going on in this country? But it's that the NFL has become this thing that everybody looks at to help America solve their problems. Roger Goodell spent a day in a domestic violence hotline center in week 3 of this season. He took time away from his thing to go to Austin, Texas, to sit in a domestic violence hotline for 3 hours and listen to stories from people. So all I'm saying is that everything is changing so much because it isn't just the National Football League worrying about football. They're worrying about social issues. And it's trying to get a conscience.
That's, it was a big story, I think it was last week, when former Bears GM Jerry Angelo talked to USA Today, and he kind of opened his heart up a little bit about his regrets, and then he tried to walk everything back, but I think a lot of it still sticks, where he said he maybe wasn't aggressive on a domestic violence case or another case, personal conduct, because it would put his team at a competitive advantage. How do you balance that in the NFL? Because I think everyone wants to see.
I think those days are over. I think those days are over. Now, anytime one of these situations hits the public now, it's going to be front sports page news. And so there's going to be no more hiding these things and saying, like that commercial is on, oh, he didn't mean it, or oh, it was an isolated, things are going to be dealt with now. I think what the NFL is going to do is they're going to have what I would call a discipline committee, a personal conduct committee. And what they're going to do is they're going to take every one of these incidents that happens with, say, if Ray Rice happens next year, this committee will convene. I think it's going to be made up of former players, respected former players, and some discipline czars right now. And they're going to get together and decide, should this player come off the field now? Is there enough evidence to take this player off? But these cases will become extremely more public than they have been in the past.
There's something we've talked about in the NFL, at least not here, with Brandon Marshall talks a lot about mental health. And he has said, one of the things that has kind of stuck with me is that the teams really need to be cognizant of that. And it's not just when they do something bad. It's, and Ronnie, I mean, you have been in a locker room with a lot of different kind of, it's very unique people in sports. How would that work, and how much is that needed?
It's very unique people in this audience. Yeah. And the reason I say that is that one of the things that a coach told me, that coached at the University of Texas, said, tell me about what I need to have to be able to coach in the National Football League. First thing he says, Ronnie, you have to have loyal assistants. I was like, oh, okay. I said, what's the other thing? He says, you got to learn how to learn. I said, learn how to learn. I said, tell me more about that. And so he started to expand on that. And one of the challenges is that if you think about learning behaviors in our society today, and you think about some of the challenges that we are dealing with, it varies all across the country of kids having to deal with certain issues. I was talking to a 6th grade teacher. I said, tell me about your class. She goes, I'm having a wonderful time, but I can assure you that right now I'm having challenges because that kid over there is having learning disabilities, that kid over there is having learning disabilities, and that kid over there is having learning disabilities. And I said, well, what are you doing about it? She goes, we don't have the resources to handle it. My point is that it's a reflection of our society. And it's a reflection on, when you think of our locker room, as Steve Young says, it's a laboratory of our society. And it reflects a lot of the things that we see each and every day. And so, yeah, it's a very difficult challenge. And I'm applauding him for doing what he's doing, Brandon Marshall, to coming out and saying, look, we have to deal with this issue. Again, I think Ted said it best. We gather around sports for a number of reasons, and yet we find ourselves realizing that Jed York is the mayor of San Francisco. When he walks around, everybody's shaking his hands, people want to touch him. He has that much influence. He has that much influence being the owner of the Washington Capitals. So what's happening is that we're starting to see now that teams are changing the way that they handle themselves, the way they manage themselves. They have to have more resources. That's where sports is headed. And it's unfortunate for us because a lot of us don't realize that we need to have all of these resources to be able to make sure that these guys, as well as our fans, are safe.
Peter, on your website, Monday Morning Quarterback, you know, this sub-website of your, what you've been doing at Sports Illustrated for a long time, you know, do you find yourself almost engrossed in these kind of stories and trying to, you know what I mean, trying to tell the whole story of the game and not just the law enforcement side?
I think one of the difficult things right now is you know, where I'm playing the role of an editor on this website. I have 4 writers, full-time writers who work for me, and trying to figure out, okay, does America right now want to read about football? Does America right now want to read about, want to get to the bottom of the domestic violence issue? What does America really want to read? And I have come to the conclusion, after talking to as many people, you know, who I trust in and out of this business, I'm convinced that you have to strike a balance. And you have to be conscientious, and you have to have a conscience about what you're doing. But I'll go back to 25 years ago. I remember I covered one of my first assignments at Sports Illustrated. Go cover the San Francisco 49ers against the Eagles in Philadelphia. Reggie White, you know, Jerome Brown against the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers were state-of-the-art. Eagles are trying to take their crown. It's an intense game at the Vet in Philadelphia. The 49ers got down big in the first half. Joe Montana threw 4 touchdown passes in the second half. And at the end of that game, I'm standing outside the tunnel waiting for the Niners to come off the field because I'm going to write about them. And I saw Eddie DeBartolo, the diminutive owner of the San Francisco 49ers, take 3 steps and jump into Ronnie Lott's arms. And he screamed, "I effing love you, Ronnie." And he said, "I'm happier right now than I've ever been in my life." And so what you try to remember when you're trying to figure out what do people want to read and what should we be writing, you want to remember that part of the reason why we do this and part of the reason why you care is because of the joy of sports, the joy of football. This past Sunday night, I am in my hotel room and I'm trying to figure out, okay, I got 10,000 words to write about the NFL weekend. What am I going to lead with? Well, the most important thing was Dallas beating Seattle, in Seattle. I mean, that's the momentous win of this season. But I said, you know what? The Cleveland Browns just killed the Pittsburgh Steelers. People in Cleveland would cut off their right arm to kill the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they just did it. And so the Cleveland Browns are 3-2. What did they win the other day? They didn't win a playoff game. They didn't win anything. But you know what? Everybody in Cleveland woke up Monday morning happy as hell. And I said, I am going to feed right into the joy and the wonder of the Cleveland Browns fans. So I led my column with Cleveland Browns and Mike Pettin and Brian Hoyer. And I mean, I think that's what sometimes we have to remember.
That's right.
We have to remember about the passion of the fans and how excited we are when our team does something really, really good.
So, Brad, don't text me after the Niners lost to the Bears, man.
That's the same thing. I was just in Atlanta for Bears Falcons and seeing the amount of Bears fans that were there. I was walking from my parking lot to the game, and there's a woman in front of me, a young woman wearing a Brad Maynard jersey.
Wow.
Brad Maynard was the punter of the Bears, who's not active any longer. And the passion.
It's a punter jersey.
And
Well, I do realize punters are people too.
I mean, we have a long snapper with his own radio show here.
Yeah.
You get everything in Chicago, and it's really wonderful to see the passion. I see it every day when I cover things, and I think what you said is perfect. You have to balance both sides. So I mean, I think this was a really good discussion. I know I learned a lot.
Good.
I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. All right.